So, Cecilia, we are so excited to have you here. And for anyone who doesn't know you, I don't think there are many people who don't, but the few people who don't know you, you're a senior policy advisor in the UK government, a freelance political journalist, writing on intersectional feminism and AI, and an award-winning speaker who's done over 150 engagements, including keynotes at the UN and the closing speech at UN UK also. And you've worked across Parliament and the civil service, led teams of over 100 people, and your work on algorithmic bias was shortlisted for a CogX award. This is quite the CV. I found it hard to say. We'd love to hear all about how those worlds come together for you and what the threads are that connect it all. So just a little bit about you, really. How did you get here? How did you get involved in all of this, and how does it come together for you?
Firstly, a huge thank you for having me. It's a real privilege to be invited onto here, hosted by two such formidable, passionate, and impressive women,
Thank you.
and to be doing a parliamentary event with yourself, Jenny, in just a couple of weeks.
Very excited.
Yeah. In terms of what ties my advocacy together, such a really difficult question, but if I had to distill it, it's dual. So I'm slightly cheating here. On the one hand, it's a kind of unquenchable desire for both present and future accountability, where systems, people, and policies that fail women and girls and or our very planet. So, for example, that's looked like a campaign I spearheaded, Break the Silence and the Violence, which I launched in the European Embassy backed by European Parliament to make misogyny a hate crime, which would create the accountability pathway that women and girls deserve. On the other hand, it's the first-hand knowledge I get and the inspiration I receive every single day from working with utterly brilliant women, organizations, and advocates in this space, observing what they can do when actually empowered rather than stymied. In essence, I've always been interested in how power operates and who it leaves out. So in government, that can be who gets access, who doesn't, and how decisions are made at scale. We know that that can determine visibility, opportunity, credibility, even safety. So my work naturally expanded from data to policy to speaking to events and then communicating that knowledge outwards in any way possible. Because if people don't understand how these systems shape their lives, they can't challenge it or improve it. So the journalism came from needing to make those dynamics legible and actually define them to myself. The speaking came from a need to kind of convene and influence at scale. You'll both know that it's the quickest way to raise awareness and convince people and to just get them in a room to tell them a story. And the policy work has come from a need to translate that into something actionable. I'm sure you've met lots of people who love to hear themselves talk, but do
Yeah.
very little about it. I'm the absolute opposite of that. So whether I'm advising government or writing or speaking internationally, the focus is the same. So it's ensuring that as these systems, particularly in AI, become more powerful, they're also more accountable, more representative, and ultimately more aligned with the societies they're shaping.
Yeah.
I
Amazing.
love that so much. I was actually talking to my mum today about how people love to talk about change, but
Mm.
the hardest thing about change is knowing that you have to be the change that you want to see.
Yeah.
It's so easy to just sit and say you want to do something, but it takes a strong type of person to actually go out and make that change. And I think that we're seeing that even it can even be reflected in something my mum and I were talking about again today, which is the social media ban in Australia.
Oh, yeah.
The UK government don't have enough legislation on AI, on social media, or anything, and they're putting it onto the people to change. But really, the legislation needs to be changed as well.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. I mean, that's a bit like the Online Safety Act consultation I was at
Hmm.
in Parliament recently, where there was this kind of pushback against the whole debate, which was basically should we ban social media for under 16s? Thankfully, we actually had some young people in the room who went, this is just a false dichotomy. It's not even what we should be arguing because it's too binary. It's not as simple as that. And you also haven't thought about the most vulnerable. I mean, people with disabilities, like how that affects them. And also the actual national consultation is, what was it, 65 pages long and aimed at parents and 10-year-olds. Like
Yeah,
the two demographics, which A, will not have the time nor the motivation to answer that, and in, really technical language. And then secondly, again, a demographic that is not going to want to spend their time or be interested in it whatsoever. So you can give the consultation to the people, and I'm all for consultations, but you've got to design it better. Anyway.
exactly. I
Yeah.
completely agree.
What I loved about how you talked about your journey is that it starts with the data. So
Yeah.
it feels like you are very evidence informed, and then you take it out, because quite often we're either seeing, a limited picture of the data, or we don't have the data at all. And I
Mhm.
think, information is power, and having that full picture is really important. And that sounds really central to everything that you're doing. You're starting from evidence and making sure everyone has the evidence to make a decision. And that feeds into this, exactly what you just said. If we're going to have a consultation, are the right people in the room?
Mhm.
Are we making sure they can convey their feedback in the appropriate way? And are we looking at this from all angles? So I think that's something we all need to think about in this world where it actually feels quite siloed at times. The people who agree are talking to each other,
Yeah.
but they're not, there's a cross through to hear everyone's perspectives.
100%. I also think that, it's so hard to make informed and correct and intentional decisions if you don't have all of the data as well. I was saying to my mum that it feels like there's an overwhelming amount of data, but it doesn't seem to be the right type of
Yeah.
data. And if it is the right type of data, it's not going to the correct people it should be. And I guess it also goes back, just tying it back to social media. I feel like I'm talking about social media a lot, but it makes me think about people being in echo chambers of misinformation, uh, and which can just feed, you know, hate and misunderstanding and disconnection.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's like red pill content. It just compounds and compounds and compounds, and it's obviously incremental. This is what people miss. A bit like the continuum of abuse. I mean, the worst types of domestic violence don't start with a man hitting a woman with a sledgehammer. As an MP once said in Parliament, it really stuck with me. It starts with cuddles on the sofa. It doesn't show itself explicitly immediately. It's content that's basically masquerading as kind of self-help and building men up and, identity kind of boosting and confidence boosting material, which is actually insidiously basically really kind of degrading, demeaning, um, and looking at women in a way that is completely and utterly misogynistic. But it doesn't appear that way at all.
Completely. And I was I was having a conversation with one of my friends, one of my really close friends, and we were talking about the Manosphere documentary that just came out on Netflix with Louis Theroux. We both watched it. And we used to watch HS Tiki Toki when we lived together, maybe 3, 4 years ago. He would go live, and we were like, wow, we can't believe how much it's escalated from him just going live and playing video games on a stream to him being this red pill manosphere
Mm.
influencer.
Mhm.
And it feels like night and day, but I guess that's how it happens. It's so gradual over time. And I remember when I stopped watching because I was like, this content isn't for me anymore. Like, this content isn't fun. It's not funny. It's not interesting.
Mm.
What it is just cringe.
Yeah.
And then it went from being cringe to being completely harmful
Yeah.
and just full of hate. And yeah, it's such a slow transition, but it is, honestly, it feels like it's in the blink of an eye. It happens at the same time.
Yeah, as you both know, I have a social enterprise called Rocking Your Teens alongside my main leadership consultancy. And even 13 years ago, when we were first crafting it, initially it was to support and increase the aspirations of teen girls and take a holistic look at their lives. But we also immediately, my business partner said, we need to support boys. And the conversation about toxic masculinity was happening. I think it's just shape shifting. It might have moved from being face to face and maybe not being seen so much to accelerated through online. Really, it's an acceleration of something. So for me, I think it's been around a while.
Mhm.
But absolutely now it's in our faces, and shows like Adolescence, shows like the Manosphere can highlight that for us, and that's great. I mean, for me, that's media holding up a mirror and letting us see ourselves, so we can do something about it.
100%. I do think that it's so hard to like stay on top of these things as well, because for some context, Cecilia, I run my own harm reduction company. I have a platform that tracks and predicts trends in crime, but right now I'm specifically looking at gender-based violence crime. So I feel
Yeah.
like I've got my ear to the ground. I'm like looking on social media, and the manosphere influencers in the documentary are not necessarily the ones that are popular now, and they're not necessarily the ones that are popular even when I started my company in 20. Oh, I started like last year in 2025, or not the same as 2024. Even the language is shifting so quickly, and it's so hard to stay on top of it. But I feel like it's like a constant thing of having to constantly be learning.
Completely. And it's about, I think, as we were saying, being evidence-based and actually having the language to talk about it. I mean, when I started that campaign to make misogyny a hate crime, I was talking in the House of Lords, aside to Michael Heseltine, to maybe 200 MPs, and obviously members of the House of Lords. Um, and I I remember initially seeing some really blank faces. I mean, I was talking about something that was not necessarily, they didn't necessarily have the language or really the knowledge, I mean, in terms of people bringing it to their awareness. And I kind of persisted and said, well, you know, since 2009, we've got one woman killed every 3 days by someone they know, typically. That's not changed. You know, if you were to flip it and look at it, and if this were women killing men at this rate for this long, and that metric, that number actually not having changed, would we have the same reaction? Would there not be national strategies, massive kind of campaigns, both government, private, etc. And so we persisted and persisted and persisted, and it was actually that year that it got named as a national emergency. And we then worked with Jess Phillips. We worked with Annalise Dodds and the now Minister for Women and Equalities to present that campaign, and get parliamentary backing, and present that with the Fabian women as well. But I think when we started, we had people coming up saying, basically, this is relevant. You know, you don't need to be doing this. You should focus on something European, because it's a European organization I was working under the banner of. You know, we should be talking about youth mobility. And I said, well, actually, if you look at the statistics, um, violence against women and girls, including digital, has risen through 37% in the last 3 years. Why are we not talking about that? The thing that is the biggest threat to girls, youth, young girls, is violence from men and boys. So what we should be looking at is actually what's training this generation, what's training the next generation, what kind of content are we absorbing, and how is that content reshaping and restructuring the way that we think. And also, of course, at that point, I mean, this is what, 2 years back when we actually started. The manosphere wasn't known, that language wasn't there. We didn't know what, you know, there was a red pill content. It was me basically just going, I actually am really, really worried about the way that we're finding AI algorithms to be actively suppressing feminist advocacy and actively amplifying misogynistic content that masquerades as confidence boosting for men. So there we have it.
100%. I feel like we just touched very slightly on your paper on algorithmic bias, which is something that really resonates with me in my own work. You know, the idea that bias isn't just a bug that you can patch, it really is structural. And I'd really love to hear how you think about that from a policy perspective and where you see the real opportunities to shift things.
Yeah, absolutely. So, excellent question. And as a systems thinker, it's music to my ears in terms of looking at bias not as a random anomaly, but as an actual structural distortion, a systemic problem. Um, and so that particular paper focused, and this was a few years back, on examples like Amazon's recruitment CV downgrading, focused on Amazon's recruitment algorithm downgrading women's CVs on the basis of being women. Predicted, the Pred poll example in the US of racially profiling recidivists and predicting inaccurately that it would be majority Black people recidivating. And so now, although those particular examples have been sort of mitigated or out of date, I find the same problems very much prevalent and also at a much higher level of danger and risk. Um, so, this is less of a risky example, but look at LinkedIn. So you had last December women from the US to the UK participating in a collective experiment by changing their genders to male on LinkedIn. And you found women like Kamalis Ladi, she's a CEO and thought leader. Her post impressions increased by 421% in a few days. Megan Cornish, she's a top voice on LinkedIn, watched her views increase 400% on the platform. And whilst that's not a super dangerous example, it does speak to professional visibility. It speaks to influence that we can or cannot have. It speaks to being able to challenge what may be sexist or chauvinistic or misogynistic content on a professional platform. And of course, it's then a feedback loop, because if you're not visible, you're not getting, for example, in our industry, speaking opportunities. You're not getting asked to be on the panel. You're not even known as a voice or thought leader, and your expertise isn't, or your resources, whatever you publish, like for example, as me as a journalist, your articles just aren't seen. So for me, I think recognizing bias as a systemic outcome is crucial. It reflects the data we choose to collect and what we ignore, the objectives we optimize for, the proxies we rely on for complex human traits, and ultimately the institutions and incentives shaping those decisions. I've been lucky enough to work with someone called Siobhan Clark. She's an author, poet, and fellow AI ethics speaker. She spoke at a summit I organized called Championing Equality in AI, which ended up being featured in Politics UK. And during that, she called bias a mirror of society, which I really liked. And so, from a policy perspective, the opportunity for me is not to just correct the reflection, but to change the system from producing it in the first place. And from that summit, a central conclusion surfaced for me, which was the need to reframe ethical design with inclusion at its core from a moral preference or activist ask to the strategic necessity it is. So, in essence, AI can either be a gateway or gatekeeper. And also, this is such a bugbear of mine, to reject the false dichotomy of innovation versus regulation. Excellent regulation and responsible design, though it doesn't sound that sexy, does not stifle innovation. On the contrary, as a litany of studies has shown, and as you all both well know, it's simply good business. It engenders trust, adoption, long-term resilience, and customer retention. So,
Wow.
lens.
And
Sorry.
can I ask you to rewind? Because you said so much there and I don't want the listeners to lose it. Can I ask you to rewind on moving it away from, you said three things. One was moral, and I'm not sure what the other two were. You said, and moving it into being strategic and,
Okay,
but what
sure.
were the three things?
So from that summit, a central conclusion for me surfaced, and that was the need to reframe ethical design with inclusion
Mhm,
at its core from a
mhm,
moral preference or activist ask to the
mhm,
strategic necessity it is. And
mhm.
in essence, AI can either be a gateway or a gatekeeper.
Yeah.
I love the gateway or gatekeeper.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah.
I love that so much because I completely agree. AI really can be a barrier to humanity, but it also could help it so, so much. I think it's really about how we use it as a tool versus as a crutch as
Exactly.
well.
Yeah. But I think that people listening, it's important for them to consider what you just said. Do they think that AI ethics is moral and nice to have,
Mm,
but really not part of the real world, but we've got to make money and we've got to make progress, or do they think it's just these activists banging on about something? And that reframe is really helpful to recognize actually this is strategic. This is going to help us move forward. This is going to open doors for us. And we can do this in the right way, or we can cause a problem.
yeah.
And that's why I just wanted to go back to it, because I think that central conversation is one that a lot of people are having.
Mm.
And the reframe is really useful for them.
I think uh, something that helps me is to look at it from a risk lens. So in risk management, we don't ask end users to secure critical infrastructure, right? We mandate audits and standards and stress testing and effectively accountability. And I think AI gendered harm should be treated no differently. Bias should be treated like with the equivalent gravitas as cybersecurity risks. If we treated them like if we treated them like security vulnerabilities with financial accountability for organizations which fail to do so, we would all be genuinely better off, as we've seen from a billion studies and a billion use cases. And I think on the flip side, not to do so is not just unjust, it's actually operationally unsound. Um, and there's also the question of when to act, because I'm sure, as you've seen a million times, there's so much kind of post crisis optics management going on, lots of like retrofitting standards and, oh, we'd better bake in that kind of inclusivity after the fact when the harm was already done. And I think we need proactive regulation to be um, kind of enforced at the get-go rather than afterwards in as an afterthought.
I completely agree. I work on the basis of preventative rather than reactive because
Mm,
it's all well and good to react to harm and say, "Oh my goodness, why did that happen?"
yeah.
But in reality, we have the tools we need to really prevent harm from happening. We really, really do.
Yeah, and I think if I take it from a strategic just to an operational level for a moment, I was with a group of senior people leaders a week or two ago, and I was asking them, when you implement new systems, who's involved, how are you doing it? And someone was saying we brought in a new system around hiring, recruitment, etc. And I was asking the questions, and they said, let's just run with it, and then if it doesn't work, then um, we'll actually find out how to fix it. And I thought the damage is done, and the
Yeah.
damage could be quite long term. You might come and bring in a short term fix, but
Yeah.
actually, what you've put into the system now could be quite dangerous.
Yeah.
And there is this tendency to do that, to not anticipate what's coming, to see what it does, and then think we can rewind. But we can't rewind. Actually, we have a whole generation of people who were possibly exposed to social media before they should have been.
Mhm.
We might have a whole generation of another group of young people who have been exposed to social media, exposed to AI now before they should have been. And again, we try and fix something, but yeah, let's not get to that point. Let's take the exercise and eat the healthy food before we end up in hospital.
Exactly.
So I love the fact that you're in that space with that thinking, Cecilia. But I know that the UK has taken quite a light touch pro innovation approach, and that's quite different from the EU. For those people who might not follow policy, can you give us a sense of what that looks like in practice, and who's it working for right now?
Yeah, sure. Great question. So essentially, there's a few kind of different elements. Number one is we regulate through existing institutions rather than having a whole new centrally kind of AI regulated new regime. So rather than building that, government asks existing regulators like ICO, FCA to apply AI principles within their domains. So in practice, that can be essentially there's no illegal AI list that each one has to kind of look at. It's sector specific interpretations, so like health, finance, policing. They're all treated differently, and there's more reliance on guidance rather than hard law. So in reality, regulation is a bit more fragmented. It's slower to crystallize, but it's also more negotiable. Number two is principles over rules. So those kind of 5 cross-cutting principles: safety, transparency, fairness, accountability, and contestability. But crucially, they're not statutory duties. So basically, companies are encouraged to comply rather than legally compelled, at least initially. Regulators interpret and enforce, which can be uneven. Again, it goes back to that kind of case by case basis situation. And that does mean there's significant room for good faith compliance, which creates flexibility. So that's the upside. But on the flip side, it can also create ambiguity, particularly for smaller actors who actually want clarity. Then there's 3, enable, don't constrain. So you've got all this effort going into kind of regulatory sandboxes, public-private partnerships, funding and access, so computer data sets, research ecosystems. And the underlying assumption, I think, is if you reduce friction, innovation will outpace risk. So, to your question, who's this actually working for? Large tech companies do stand to benefit, and scale ups like regulatory flexibility, great. Ability to shape guidance to engagement, wonderful. And resources to navigate ambiguity. Um, so on paper, the UK's kind of AI ecosystem then can have faster experimentation and easier market entry. And there's very strong signaling to investors, basically like the UK is open for AI business. And it works less well for individuals and affected communities because protections are more reactive than preventative, like what we were talking about, Leah. Harm often has to occur before enforcement can kick in, and accountability pathways can be quite unclear. So your smaller companies, public sector adopters can kind of be like, we don't know what good looks like. And actually something I've been working on literally is a blueprint, or like if you think of B Corp certification for what, and this is with UKAI Women in AI, which I co-founded, which is essentially a policy or report piece which would then feed into actual certification for companies in the UK to go, okay, this is a centralized definition of what is ethical, what is good, and actually what is the gold standard that we could then roll out internationally. So it's about kind of reframing again from that moral activist ask to, this is what brilliant looks like. This is what the gold standard in terms of compliance looks like. If you then get certified, or if you get some sort of badge of recognition which says we comply with these standards, you then get all the benefits that comes with that. And it means that the UK could actually be a leading country on the global on the global kind of landscape, which hasn't really been done before. Obviously, we have acts like the UKAI Act, but that's not a central definition of what it is for companies to adhere to in a way that is purely ethical.
Wow. I really do feel like we should have a coffee after this because I feel like we could collab in some way. Wow, yeah. I
There's
would
a
like to, yeah. I feel like there's so much overlap.
there's a lot of opportunity that you're sharing,
Yeah.
which is fantastic. And I think the practical is so important. I love how you're talking about it. When I completed I completed an MIT AI strategy and leadership program, and so often sort of tech professionals, so senior tech professionals were being called into a CEO's office, and they were saying, "We want to know what works."
Mm,
And they couldn't answer that because there haven't been enough use cases. It's not always shared. This is new and this is evolving and this is changing. And although you might not be able to create something concrete, some more concrete guidance, I think people are seeking, and guidelines, some ways of thinking about this because it's so new. We haven't got that, and I think through our book, that's, we're aiming to give some of that also. And I think the people doing great stuff
mm.
together, I think we're going to put something really useful out there that's going to be helpful for people.
100%. And I think in times like this, we really need a community of people who want to do good things, doing good things.
Who know about each other as well.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
often kind of do that Michelle Obama like credit reflecting
Mm,
kind of strategy of going, oh, but have you heard of Jenny and
yes.
Leah? They're doing
Yes.
this. And
Yeah.
hey, Jenny and Leah, have you heard of CJ and
Yes.
Claire? And you should really speak to this person. I
Yeah.
think it's those connectors that are so important, especially when we have situations like LinkedIn algorithms being biased
Yes.
towards person.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Literally.
Exactly.
100%. So, Cecilia, you've worked in so many different departments, and these departments all hold very sensitive data about people's lives, whether that's health, tax, benefits, or innovation. I'm wondering how confident you are that the public sector is ready for AI to start shaping decisions in those spaces, especially for the communities with the least power to push back.
It's a great question because it kind of drills down to the core of AI is not abstract and AI risk is human risk. It's deeply, deeply human. So the honest answer is there's real progress, but we're not yet where we need to be, not at all, especially for those with the least power to challenge decisions. So across government, there's genuinely committed teams doing serious work on data ethics, assurance, and responsible use. Absolutely. Intent is there, but readiness isn't just about intent. It's about capability, consistency, and accountability at scale. So for me, the biggest risk is not that government is using AI recklessly. It's more that it's being used in ways that are difficult to see, difficult to challenge, and difficult to understand, particularly for those already navigating really complex systems. Because if you're time poor, resource constrained, already marginalized, you're way less able to contest uh, or even feel that you can contest a decision or know what contesting that decision looks like, especially if it's mediated by an algorithm, right? And that's where inequality starts quietly compounding. And let's be real, there's no government that's got this down 100%. Look at Australia's robo-debt scheme or the Dutch childcare benefit scandal, when the algorithm used by the tax authority flagged families for fraud, but it actually effectively baked in racial profiling and socioeconomic bias. So none of at least I don't think, any of the people involved in designing or deploying these systems would have had malicious intentions, and none can be expected to do this perfectly. But what is important is transparency that's meaningful, not performative. We need to know how and when AI is being used in ways that we can actually understand and act on. B, accountability pathways. If a decision is wrong, we need a human point of escalation, a clear route to challenge, and institutional responsibility for outcomes. And C, I really think that design should be based on the most vulnerable, not the average user, because systems that work for the most marginalized tend to work for everyone, but the inverse of that is not true.
Wow, I love that. Yeah, systems should be made for the most marginalized. They should. I think everyone needs to be included, and when you make things for the average, you leave out so many people, which really pushes people to the fringes, into fringe beliefs and ideas, and it really can polarize people as well.
As you were speaking, I was thinking of an example someone shared with me. They were working in a large global corporate organization, and they had started having an AI board member in the
Mm,
room. So they'd have a conversation, and then they'd come last to the AI board member and say, "What's your perspective?"
mm,
And include that. And I think when you do that, AI is quite visible.
mm,
You've got the board member, you've got a perspective that you're throwing in. Um, the challenge I think that we're talking about is when you just don't realize that AI is maybe in all of the conversations
yeah,
that people have used AI in different ways to form the data, to have the conversations, to think about what they're going to say, and then AI is just within it, and we can't see it as you
yeah.
were describing, and so we don't even realize. And that's really interesting to think about whether we do say, is there an AI person, a person, AI named, a named AI, which is giving its perspective, and then we
Mm.
can trace that perspective. But the way we're currently doing things is that we can't. So I just think that's something for us to consider. Is it embedded, or is it standalone but still informing for us in
Mm.
the future? And I don't know what the answer will be. But I know you'll be in the rooms discussing it, Cecilia, and you've been in lots of rooms from international summits alongside former heads of state. You've named some of them, the UN as well. When you're in those spaces, does it feel like this type of conversation, the AI equity conversation, is actually happening, or is it still fighting for oxygen in the rooms?
I think the equity in AI conversation is still largely missing, I'll be honest. I think there is awareness of the harms that women and underrepresented groups uh, can suffer as a result of bias in algorithms or the general kind of overarching brunt of digital violation. Like, I think in many rooms I've been in, people know very well, like the 96% of deepfake pornography statistic targets women, and 99% of that is non-consensual image abuse. Um, we know that, the research from UNESCO that online harassment has genuine and physical effects on women's participation in public life. Like 44% of female parliamentarians are receiving death and sexual violence threats. 30% of women are female journalists are self-censoring on social media. 20% are withdrawing completely. And over a quarter are reporting negative mental health impacts linked to online violence, which is often which is often using AI-driven systems. And I think there's awareness of the harms, but there's less kind of conversation happening around how to prevent those harms. So I think when it comes to harms for young people, for example, something that Laura Bates discussed in her book, The New Age of Sexism, how AI is reinventing misogyny, which is incredible. She classed this as the next sexual violence epidemic facing schools and workplaces. The absolute ease with which um, kids can use these kind of systems and apps to create and maintain image-based abuse. And the fact that there are so few guardrails on that, and that the onus of responsibility gets passed on to passed from platforms to parents a lot of the time, which is really inappropriate. So I think it comes down to reframing that conversation and bringing those groups together to say, okay, AI is inextricably embedded and interlinked with kind of everything we're doing in day-to-day life. There's a very clear continuum from digital to physical, as we've kind of drawn out. And we have to look at this holistically rather than in isolated silos. And, we need to get people out of the echo chambers and to start challenging the systems that they're using. And also looking at the fact that we're sometimes passing from human decision maker to just AI decision human confirmer.
Mm. Mm. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. I really see that. I really, really do. And I guess just leading on from that, I'm wondering, what does truly good AI governance actually look like to you? What should we be aiming for in an idealistic world that maybe could become a reality world?
Great and very difficult question. I definitely don't have all the answers.
Mm.
But ultimately, it would consist of 5 elements. So, one, and I think is something we all champion, inclusion as a design prerequisite, not damage control, reactionary afterthought. Rights like to explanation, human review, to simply know when AI is being used in decisions that affect them, designed in rather than retrofitted. 2, diversity at the point of power. So not consultation at the end, but representation right from the start. 3, incentivization being aligned with public trust and value rather than financial gain. But obviously, this is in an ideal world. Not so capitalist, patriarchal one. 4, meaningful transparency as understanding and agency rather than disclosure after the fact, because that enables real scrutiny. And 5, on that point, true accountability with teeth that isn't afraid to bite.
Mm.
Institutional ownership of outcomes, clear accessible routes to decision challenging, and a complete rejection of the algorithm did it defense. So genuine rather than theoretical redress.
Yeah. Yeah. That's indeed. I also wanted to share, I got the book and it is a fantastic book. So
Yeah.
truly
Yes,
agree as
incredible.
well.
It's really, really good. I've
Yeah.
been reading it on my Kindle as well.
Fine.
I've been following Laura Bates for a few years now, and honestly, like I completely agree with almost everything that she says. I think more people need to know about her as well.
We
But
need to get her
yeah,
on the podcast.
we do. I literally just wrote it down, Mum. I just wrote down.
You
I
make
just wrote it down.
you made so many good points there, and I think
Yeah,
the with teeth makes a difference as well.
yeah,
Sadly, we just seem to be in a world where people need consequences to be able to, to take action. Maybe that's just because there's so much to do, but I think that we need to be able to take action, when things are not right. But yeah, if we can do everything we can before that point, that absolutely makes sense. We hear your passion, we're in danger in this podcast today, I think, of just dangerously just agreeing on
yeah.
everything and not challenging each other enough. But I think everything that you've said is a challenge. It's a challenge to the government. It's a challenge to the listener. It's a challenge to the world. It's a challenge for us to think not just about what we need to do, but how we do it. And for each person, I think, to take something away about, how am I going to have a different conversation about AI? How am I going to look at it differently? How am I going to be interested in what the government is doing around AI? Because I think the challenge is everyone's so busy with their head down, getting on with their daily lives, that they don't think about that big picture. They're not thinking about the system. They're not thinking about the strategies. And then it feels like it's done on to us.
Yeah.
But
Mhm.
actually, we have a voice. We should be keeping abreast of all of this. This has been so informative, I think, for anyone who doesn't know what's happening in the UK around AI. But the
Mhm.
challenge is to keep up to date,
Yeah.
to keep following you, to keep seeing what's coming out there, and think about how that affects us all.
Exactly. Exactly. And now we'll move on to the quick fire round, which is,
Oh,
as I always say, my favorite part of the podcast recording because you really get really, really good tidbits of information. Um, so are you ready?
as I'll ever be.
If you could get one AI related policy change through Parliament tomorrow, what would it be?
Ooh, can I come back to that one? It's
Yeah,
the one
you
that's
can.
yeah, let me come back to that one.
Mhm. What is the most dangerous thing people in government currently believe about AI?
Oh, very good question. For me, it's about it's more about the nature of the effects of AI systems, which often isn't realized, which goes beyond government. Um, and that is that AI is actively and often an exponentially in an exponentially compounding way, reshaping our realities rather than us being the drivers. So
Okay.
that continuous restructuring can get missed. And essentially, AI is being treated as a tool that supports decisions, when in reality, it's very much reshaping how all of those decisions are being made, which can mean we optimize for what is measurable, deferring to what is calculated, and we can lose sight of human judgment, the human judgment that public service depends on.
100%. Yeah. And what is a book or report you'd put on every minister's desk?
You've actually already mentioned
Oh.
it.
But it was a recommendation from you.
There we We've come full circle. So book-wise, it would have to be Laura Bates and the New Age of Sexism, how the revolution is reinventing misogyny. I actually met her at that very round table, one that we did, which is called Tackling Misogyny in AI. It's one of the best written books on AI I've read, and has inspired both articles I've published with Risk Global and Byline Times on the age of artificial affection, i.e. AI companionship, and the exponential amplification of misogynistic content by algorithms. And for report, um, two answers. One, the Lovelace report. I think it draws out the fact that we've got what 20 to 30K women leaving the UK tech sector entirely, not just roles but industry themselves. We have unclear pathways to advancement, a lack of recognition, inadequate pay, and that's costing the UK 1.4 to 2.2 billion annually. As apart from obviously the awful kind of and compounding effects that that has on women's careers, pathways, gender pay gap, etc. Secondly, we pulled together a report that Laura Bates actually contributed to, which is literally tackling misogyny in AI, that was convened by Baroness Tangam Debonair. She's brilliant. So that was all of UKAI, Women in AI. That was Tangam, that was Laura Bates, and a whole bunch of people who are incredible advocates in this space. And it drills down into how to actually give you the tools to combat misogyny in AI. So there you go.
Yeah, I love it.
Brilliant.
And so we'll go back to question one if you're
If you
ready.
want to.
If you want to, you don't have to. You don't have to.
I don't think I even made any notes on it. So I think I'll just call it there, end on a
That's
high.
Okay,
Yeah. But I
that's
will write you the answer to that and give it more thought.
no, we don't. It's fine. It's all good. It's all good. You've given us so much. It's been
Oh, that's
hugely
good.
valuable
Mhm.
conversation. So happy to be connected with you, and very
Yeah.
much looking forward to meeting you in person in Parliament
Mhm.
in just a couple of weeks. It's been a real honour. Thank you.
My
Thank
absolute
you.
pleasure.